Yesterday, we got some pretty big news as Pierre LeBrun reported on Insider Trading that the Columbus Blue Jackets and Patrik Laine are mutually working together to find a trade. LeBrun said that's the goal from everyone involved. Laine would like to move on. His agent has had conversations with the Blue Jackets about it, and both sides are going to work together to try and get that done. He wants a fresh start. Hasn't been a good time in Columbus. So add Patrik Laine's name to the list of big name players that are available for trade this offseason, along with the likes of Martin Necas, maybe Mitch Marner, Nikolai Ehlers, Linus Ullmark, Jacob Markstrom. If you like trades, it's shaping up to be a pretty exciting summer. So in today's video, I want to talk about 5 realistic trade scenarios for Patrik Laine that I think could actually happen. But before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about Patrik Laine and some of the discourse that's been going on Twitter since this news came out. I've seen a lot of people saying, I hope my team doesn't trade for Patrik Laine. How many fresh starts does this guy need? He's a locker room cancer. He's a, drama queen, this, that, and the other thing. And in my opinion, that is complete BS. This is a guy who I think when he first got to Columbus wasn't utilized properly under John Tortorella. Tortorella tried to turn Patrik Laine into a power forward, a 200-foot player, and that's just not Patrik Laine's game. I don't think it's ever going to be his game. A couple of years ago, his father passed away unexpectedly, and listen, NHL players are human at the end of the day. I can't even imagine how difficult it must have been for Patrik Laine to try and put all of his focus on playing hockey when he's going through something like that. Back in January, Laine entered the player assistance program to prioritize his mental health, which he is still currently in. So it's really not difficult to understand why Laine wants to put these last few years in Columbus behind him. I think if anybody in the NHL right now deserves a fresh start, it is Patrik Laine. Another thing that I wanted to touch on before we get into some trade scenarios is Patrik Laine's value. Listen, I'm still a big believer in Patrik Laine's game. I think he's incredibly dynamic offensively, and when healthy, I believe that Patrik Laine is still one of the best pound-for-pound natural goal scorers in the NHL, even though Laine hasn't scored 30 goals since the 2018-19 season, which was just his 3rd year in the league. When you look at his total goals over the past 3 seasons, 54 in 129 games, so divide that up across 3 seasons, it's about a 34-goal pace. He was point per game with the Blue Jackets in 2021-22 with 26 goals and 56 points in 56 games. He's never finished a season with a shooting percentage below 12. When Patrik Laine is in the lineup, he is a very productive player. That being said, if you're expecting the return that the Columbus Blue Jackets are going to get for Patrik Laine to be something like a first-round draft pick, a roster player, and a top prospect, I think you're going to be pretty surprised when he actually does end up getting moved. Because of how much time he's missed over the past few seasons, the fact that he has a cap hit of $8.7 million, I find it hard to imagine that the Columbus Blue Jackets are going to get all that crazy of a return. With that all being said, though, let's go ahead and take a look at what I think are some realistic trade scenarios for Patrik Laine. The first being him being dealt to Utah. I think Utah makes a ton of sense as a trade destination for Laine. You talk about wanting a fresh start, well, how about going to a team that is getting a fresh start and heading into their first season after being relocated? I've said on the channel multiple times recently that I believe this new ownership group is going to want to come in and make a big first impression. I'm expecting Utah to be very active in both free agency and the trade market. Heading into the offseason, Utah is projected to have around $43.6 million in cap space according to Cap Friendly. They have more than enough room to take on the remaining 2 years of Patrik Laine's contract at $8.7 mil per. They also have an embarrassment of riches in terms of draft picks. Utah is set to have 4 second-round selections in the 2025 NHL entry draft, and in my opinion, the most I can see Patrik Laine going for is maybe a late second and a mid-tier prospect, or just an early second-round draft pick, something like that. I don't think Columbus is going to get a first-round draft pick or a top prospect in return. So for my mock trade, I have Patrik Laine going to Utah straight up for their 2025 second-round draft pick, which I think is probably going to end up being the earliest of their 4 second-rounders in 2025. The other 3 they own is Toronto, Edmonton, and New York's. New York Rangers, that is. It also should be mentioned that any of the draft picks you see in these mock trades are 2025 at the earliest. Due to the fact that Patrik Laine is still in the player assistance program, he can't be traded until he comes out of it, and that likely won't happen until way after the 2024 draft at the end of this month. Moving on now to my next trade scenario for Patrik Laine, I think the Vancouver Canucks definitely make some sense. They're one of those teams that are heavily rumored to be in on Martin Necas. They're in the market for a top 6 forward. It was reported that they are kind of having trouble meeting Carolina's asking price for Necas. So if they aren't able to get a deal done with Carolina for Necas, maybe they could shift focus and try to target someone like Patrik Laine. In terms of what a deal could look like, I have Patrik Laine going to Vancouver, 25% retained, in exchange for Ilya Mikheyev, Tristan Nielsen, a 2025 second, and a 2026 fifth. It's been reported recently that the Canucks are looking to move Ilya Mikheyev to get a bit more cap flexibility. Mikheyev has 2 more years left on his deal at a cap hit of $4.75 million. So in this mock trade, the Canucks, as Ricky would say from the Trailer Park Boys, will be getting 2 birds stoned at once. They're getting rid of the Mikheyev contract and also adding the top 6 forward that they're in the market for. If the Blue Jackets would be willing to retain salary and take salary back on in a Laine trade, I think it would definitely improve the return, and that's why I don't just have them getting a second round draft pick here. I have them getting a prospect in Tristan Nielsen and also a 2026 fifth. Tristan Nielsen is a 24-year-old undrafted prospect who the Canucks signed to an entry-level contract a couple of years ago, and he's been very productive for Abbotsford in the American Hockey League. Could be something there. Mikheyev's a guy that I think could prove to be pretty useful for Columbus as well. Slot into the middle 6, kill penalties. Maybe he plays well there, and then in the final year of his contract, they could look to move him for an additional draft pick or prospect. The next team that I think would be a realistic option to trade for Patrik Laine is the Anaheim Ducks, who have missed the playoffs now for 6 consecutive seasons. They really bottomed out and were in the very basement of the NHL the last 2 years. When it comes to the Anaheim Ducks rebuild, I think it's getting to the point where they're going to start to look to improve and turn the corner a little bit, and if they're going to do that, they need to find some scoring. They finished 30th in the NHL in goals for per game this past season. They had a bottom 10 ranked power play, so the Ducks definitely come to my mind as a team that should be interested when a top line sniper becomes available, a guy that I think if he plays a full season is still capable of pushing the 40 goal mark. Anaheim is another team similar to Utah that has an abundance of cap space, projected to have around $33.3 million heading into the offseason, so Columbus probably wouldn't have to retain any salary as part of a deal to Anaheim or take any salary back. The Ducks can easily afford to take on the final 2 years of Patrik Laine's contract, and I mean, it would actually just help them hit the cap floor. The mock trade that I threw together for Patrik Laine going to Anaheim is the Ducks receiving Laine and the Columbus Blue Jackets receiving restricted free agent Benoit Olivier Groulx, a 2025 third, which is Toronto's, and Anaheim's 2026 third. Bo Groulx is a 24-year-old forward who was a second-round draft pick by the Ducks back in 2018. Since turning pro, has been pretty productive in the time he's spent in the American Hockey League with the San Diego Gulls, but really hasn't been able to find any scoring touch whatsoever at the NHL level, although he's played very limited minutes. His defensive analytics look decent. I definitely think there's a guy there that can be, a useful bottom 6 energy forward that can kill some penalties, and when you look at his production in junior with the Mooseheads and in the American Hockey League, I think there's definitely more scoring touch there than he showed at the NHL level so far in his career. Moving on now to the next team that I think are a realistic option for Patrik Laine, the New York Islanders. We talked a little bit about the Islanders when I made a video similar to this on Nikolai Ehlers. The Islanders could definitely use a top line sniper to slot in next to Matt Barzal and Bo Horvat on the top line. The Islanders really struggled to find them a consistent line mate this past season. They're actually the only team on my list that made the playoffs last year, so their cap situation is, a lot less flexible than some of the other teams we've talked about so far. So in my mock trade, I have the Islanders retaining 50%, which leads to, a much better return. For the Columbus Blue Jackets, I have them getting Oliver Wahlstrom, prospect Danny Nelson, and a 2025 second round draft pick. Oliver Wahlstrom is a restricted free agent, a guy that I definitely think could use a change of scenery. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work out with the Islanders. Prospect Danny Nelson is a big centerman who was selected in the second round at 49th overall by the Islanders in 2023. Had a strong first season with Notre Dame in the NCAA, 23 points in 30 games. Decent prospect. Moving on now to the next team on my list, I have the Detroit Red Wings. Goal scoring really wasn't the issue for Detroit this past season. It was defense and goaltending, but when you look at their roster, this is still a team that definitely lacks top-end talent offensively. They have upcoming UFAs like Patrick Kane, David Perron, and Daniel Sprong. There's going to be holes to fill in that forward group heading into the offseason. According to Cap Friendly, the Red Wings are projected to have around $29.4 million in cap space, which looks like a lot, but they have RFAs like Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, and Joe Veleno. Those 3 guys are going to take up a big chunk of that 30 mil. So that's why in my mock trade, I have Columbus taking on a little bit of salary back, acquiring Robbie Fabry, who has 1 year left on his contract. It carries a cap hit of $4 million. along with Jonathan Berggren, and in exchange, obviously, the Red Wings acquire Laine. Robby Fabbri is a guy who has scored at a 20-plus goal pace in each of his 5 seasons with the Red Wings, has definitely dealt with his fair share of injuries, but when healthy, Fabbri has definitely proven to be a pretty efficient goal scorer, and he's the type of player that I think a team like Columbus could look to flip closer to the trade deadline and maybe get, an additional second or third round draft pick depending on the kind of year Fabbri has. Jonathan Berggren is someone we've talked about on the channel quite a bit. Earlier this season, it was reported that the Red Wings were involved in trade talks surrounding Jonathan Berggren. He's somebody that I don't really think has gotten a fair shot so far with the Red Wings. He's been very productive everywhere he's played since being drafted, including his stints in the NHL. I think Berggren is a guy that can be very effective in a middle six scoring role, getting looks on the power play. I feel like there's a 50-point player there, and at just 23 years old, I think that could be an enticing asset for a team like Columbus. And now finally, finishing out the video with the last team on my list, the Chicago Blackhawks. This one is pretty self-explanatory. The Blackhawks need to find some talented players to surround Connor Bedard with in the top 6. So when a former 40 goal scorer who's still only 26 years old becomes available, and his value's at an all-time low right now, so cost of acquisition may not be that crazy, a team like Chicago, I think 1000% has to at least inquire about him. I think Connor Bedard and Patrik Laine together has the potential to be magic. The Blackhawks are another team who have an abundance of cap space, and taking on the final 2 years of Patrik Laine's contract at $8.7 million wouldn't be a problem. He would actually help them reach the cap floor. For my mock trade, I have the Blackhawks acquiring Patrik Laine for prospect Alex Ferrand, 19-year-old forward who is a 4th rounder by the Blackhawks in 2023. He spent the last few seasons in the OHL with Sudbury. Along with Ferrand, I have the Blue Jackets getting a 2025 second, which is Dallas's, so it'll likely be a later second round draft pick. So that is going to wrap up today's video, going over 6 trade scenarios for Patrik Laine. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so let me know how you feel about these mock trades down below in the comments. If you have a mock trade yourself that you want to share, feel free to leave it down below in the comments as well. If you guys got all the way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave it a like. It definitely helps out the videos a ton, and it's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.